I'm Audrey Collins, 32, sitting alone in my apartment as rain taps against the windows. My phone buzzes a text with a photo of Madison's lavish wedding reception. I stare at the image, remembering how I stood at the back of that grand hall, uninvited yet present, watching 250 guests celebrate while I remained invisible. Hundreds of chairs, elaborate place settings, and not one seat for me despite sharing 18 years of childhood. Then my phone rings. It's Ryan, Madison's new husband, calling from their honeymoon. His voice trembles with panic. I never expected what happened next would turn our family inside out. Before I dive into this story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button if you've ever felt invisible to your own family, and subscribe to join our community of survivors and thrivers. Madison and I weren't always strangers. Growing up in suburban Boston, I was the older sister by 5 years, the one who taught Madison how to ride a bike, braid her hair, and stand up to the neighborhood bullies. I have vivid memories of us building blanket forts during thunderstorms, creating elaborate fairy gardens in the backyard, and performing dramatic plays for our parents in the living room. Those days, her hand would slip easily into mine when we crossed the street, and she'd crawl into my bed during scary movies, burying her face in my shoulder. But as we grew, the subtle favoritism our parents showed became impossible to ignore. Madison was the beautiful one, with her perfect blonde curls and bright blue eyes that mirrored our mother's. By age 8, she was competing in children's beauty pageants, our parents beaming from the audience as they invested thousands in costumes, coaching, and travel. Meanwhile, I threw myself into academics, bringing home straight A's and academic achievement awards that would sit neglected on the refrigerator, eventually falling behind Madison's newest pageant trophy photos. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became our mother's favorite refrain whenever I failed to meet her standards. Madison knows how to present herself. Madison knows how to charm people. Madison would never argue back. The comparisons were relentless, each one a tiny cut that eventually left me bleeding self-doubt. The first major betrayal came when I was 16, a junior in high school. I'd been dating Jason Mitchell for almost a year. He was my first love, the varsity soccer captain with kind eyes who wrote me poetry and made mixed CDs of his favorite songs. Madison was barely 11 then, but already developing the confidence and curves that made her seem older. The night of my junior prom, I came downstairs in my emerald green dress to find Jason waiting in our living room. As I descended the stairs, I saw him look past me to Madison, who had positioned herself in the doorway, twirling her hair and giggling at something he'd said. That night, I returned home early, mascara streaked down my face, after catching them kissing behind the gym. When I confronted Madison, she burst into tears, claiming Jason had pursued her, and she was too scared to tell me. Our parents rushed to her defense, comforting her while I stood there, heartbroken twice over. "You're being dramatic, Audrey," my mother said, stroking Madison's hair. "She's just a child. You need to be more understanding. You need to apologize to your sister," my father added sternly. "Look how upset she is." I stood there in disbelief, my dress wrinkled, my corsage wilted, watching as they comforted the true transgressor while I was cast as the villain. That night, I locked myself in my bedroom and made a promise. I would escape this toxic dynamic as soon as possible. 2 years later, I left for Northwestern University in Chicago, putting 800 miles between myself and my family's dysfunction. I limited my visits to major holidays, made excuses to miss family vacations, and built a new life centered around real friendships and genuine achievements. I double majored in marketing and psychology, graduated with honors, and secured a position at a prestigious digital marketing firm. By 30, I was leading my own team and had just purchased my first condo. Meanwhile, Madison dropped out of college after 2 semesters to become an Instagram influencer, parlaying her pageant experience and natural beauty into a moderately successful social media presence. Our parents financed her apartment, her designer wardrobe, and her various failed business ventures, a skincare line, a boutique clothing shop, a short-lived podcast, Each failure was met with unwavering support and additional funding, while my promotions and achievements received perfunctory congratulations, if acknowledged at all. Last spring, Madison announced her engagement to Ryan Chapman, heir to a regional banking fortune. Within days, my mother called, asking me to be a bridesmaid. For a moment, I felt a glimmer of hope that this milestone might heal our fractured relationship. Madison really wants you involved, my mother insisted. This is her chance to bring the family together again. Don't disappoint her. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I flew back to Boston for the engagement party, smiled through the bridal shower, and spent thousands on a bridesmaid dress I secretly hated. Then, 3 weeks before the wedding, I received a terse email from the wedding planner. Due to changes in the wedding party structure, your services as bridesmaid will no longer be required. The bride thanks you for your understanding. No personal call, no explanation. When I tried contacting Madison, my calls went straight to voicemail. My parents dodged my questions, saying only that Madison felt it would be less stressful with fewer attendants. It was my cousin Bethany who finally told me the truth during a late-night phone call. Audrey, I hate to tell you this, but Madison's telling everyone you're too busy with work to participate in the wedding. She's making it sound like you abandoned her. The familiar sting of betrayal returned, sharper than ever. I'd been erased again, and this time, I hadn't even done anything wrong. The week before Madison's wedding, I debated whether to attend at all. Every rational part of me screamed to stay away, to protect myself from further humiliation. Yet something deeper, perhaps, that lingering bond of sisterhood or the eternal hope for reconciliation, kept me from declining entirely. I called my parents for guidance, a decision I quickly regretted. Of course you should come, Audrey, my mother said with that familiar note of impatience. You need to be the bigger person. That's what family does. Madison's just overwhelmed with wedding details, my father added. She doesn't mean anything by it. Always the excuses, always the expectation that I would bend while Madison remained rigidly entitled to her behavior. I hung up feeling more confused than before. The final decision came after a conversation with my cousin Bethany, who revealed something that ignited my determination. Madison told the extended family, "You couldn't make it because you're in the middle of some big work project in Europe," Bethany said. "Aunt Judith was saying how sad it is that you prioritize work over family." That deliberate lie, that calculated damage to my reputation, was the tipping point. I decided to attend not out of familial obligation, but to confront the fabrication head-on. I booked a last-minute flight to Boston, arranged for a hotel room separate from the family block, and selected a sophisticated navy dress that wouldn't compete with the bridal party, but would make it clear I hadn't come to hide. The wedding day arrived with perfect June weather, sunlight streaming through stained glass windows at the historic church downtown. I slipped into the sanctuary just as the music began, positioning myself at the very back row. No one in my family noticed me, as they were all seated near the front, their attention focused on the altar where Ryan waited, handsome in his tailored tuxedo. When Madison appeared at the entrance, a collective gasp rose from the guests. She was undeniably stunning in her custom Vera Wang gown, her blonde hair arranged in an elaborate updo adorned with tiny diamonds that caught the light. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of nostalgia for the little girl who once asked me to braid her hair before school. I remained standing at the back throughout the ceremony, watching my sister pledge her life to a man she'd known for barely a year. Neither of my parents turned around. Not one family member noticed my presence. I was a ghost at my own sister's wedding. After the ceremony, I followed the crowd to the reception at the Fairmont Copley Plaza Hotel. The grand ballroom had been transformed into a winter wonderland, Madison's favorite season despite the June wedding date, with crystal decorations, white flowers, and thousands of tiny lights creating the illusion of stars overhead. Outside the entrance, an elaborate seating chart displayed cards for each of the 250 guests. I scanned the chart methodically, searching for my name among the calligraphed cards. Table by table, name by name, I confirmed what I already suspected. I didn't exist. Not only was there no seat for me, but there was no acknowledgement that Madison even had a sister. The family table included our parents, grandparents, two distant cousins from Idaho, and even our mother's college roommate, but no place for me. As I stood there, processing this deliberate erasure, I overheard a conversation between two of Madison's friends. "Is Madison's sister coming?" one asked. "No, she's traveling abroad for work," the other replied confidently. Madison was really disappointed, but you know how Audrey is always putting her career first. The lie stung more in person than it had over the phone. I had become the villain in my own family story, painted as the cold, career-obsessed sister who couldn't be bothered to attend her only sibling's wedding. The narrative was so complete, so believable because it had been cultivated for years. I considered leaving then, sparing myself further pain, but something kept me rooted. Perhaps it was the need for confirmation, the masochistic desire to see the full extent of my exclusion, or simply the human need for confrontation and clarity. I entered the reception, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server who didn't question my presence. I positioned myself against a wall, watching as guests found their assigned tables, as speeches were given toasting the happy couple, as my parents beamed with pride at their beautiful daughter. It was during the first dance that Madison finally saw me. Her eyes met mine across the dance floor, and her perfect smile faltered for just a moment. She whispered something to Ryan, who glanced in my direction with a frown, before they continued their choreographed waltz. 10 minutes later, Madison approached me in the hallway outside the restrooms, her expression tight with anger beneath her bridal makeup. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, glancing around to ensure we weren't overheard. "You weren't invited." "Clearly," I replied, maintaining my composure. "I just wanted to see for myself if the rumors were true, that you've been lying about why I'm not part of your wedding." "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her eyes shifted away from mine. "You told everyone I'm in Europe for work," I said, "that I chose not to come. We both know that's not true." Madison's perfect facade cracked slightly. What was I supposed to say? That we're not close? That would just make everyone uncomfortable and ruin the vibe of my special day. "You could have told the truth that you disinvited me without explanation. Or better yet, you could have actually included your only sister in your wedding." "This is so typical of you," Madison snapped, her voice rising slightly, "always making everything about yourself. You abandoned our family years ago, Audrey. You moved away and barely visit. You don't call mom and dad. You've never made an effort with Ryan's family. Why should I pretend we're close when we're not?" Her version of reality was so twisted, so self-serving, that it momentarily left me speechless. In her mind, my self-preservation was abandonment, my independence was selfishness, and my absence, which she had orchestrated, was my own failing. Before I could respond, Ryan appeared at her side, his hand possessively on her waist. "Is everything okay, babe?" he asked, though his eyes were fixed on me with unmistakable hostility. "Audrey was just leaving," Madison said, leaning into him. "She stopped by to congratulate us, but she can't stay." "I think that's best," Ryan agreed, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The security team can escort you out." As if on cue, two suited men materialized beside me. I hadn't realized the wedding had actual security personnel, but of course it would no expense spared for Madison's perfect day. "That won't be necessary," I said, straightening my shoulders. "I can find my own way out." As I walked through the ballroom toward the exit, I passed my parents' table. My father's eyes met mine briefly. A flicker of recognition quickly replaced by discomfort as he turned away, pretending not to see me. My mother never looked up at all, too engaged in conversation with the wedding planner about the timing of the cake cutting. Outside in the warm June evening, I hailed a taxi back to my hotel, tears finally spilling down my cheeks as I accepted the truth I'd been avoiding for years. I had no place in this family, not at the wedding, not at the table, not in their lives. I had been systematically erased, and perhaps it was time I accepted that reality and stopped hoping for a different ending to our story. In the days following Madison's wedding, I implemented a complete family blackout. I blocked their numbers, unfollowed their social media accounts, and threw myself into work with renewed intensity. My team at the marketing agency was pitching for a major athletic apparel account, and I volunteered to lead the presentation, grateful for the distraction of 14-hour workdays and weekend strategy sessions. My friends rallied around me with the kind of support my family had never provided. Rachel, my college roommate turned neighbor, brought dinner to my condo on nights I worked late. Jordan, my colleague and friend, covered for me when I needed a mental health day. Eliza, my therapist, squeezed in extra sessions to help me process the wedding fiasco. Family estrangement is more common than most people realize. Eliza reminded me during one particularly difficult session. Sometimes the healthiest thing we can do is create distance from toxic relationships, even when those relationships are with family members. Intellectually, I understood this. Emotionally, I still struggled with the societal expectation that family bonds should supersede all else, regardless of how damaging those bonds might be. 3 weeks passed in this cocoon of work and chosen family. I avoided checking Madison's social media, but occasionally glimpses filtered through. Rachel showed me a photo of Madison and Ryan in Santorini, posing against the iconic blue domes, their honeymoon apparently as picture-perfect as their wedding. "She looks happy," I said flatly, handing back Rachel's phone. "Instagram happy," Rachel corrected. "Nobody posts the fights or the food poisoning or the flight delays." I nodded, but privately wondered if Madison ever experienced such mundane disruptions to her charmed life. It always seemed like the universe conspired to give her exactly what she wanted, while teaching me harsh lessons in disappointment. Then came the call that shattered my carefully constructed distance. It was 2:17 a.m. when my phone rang, the sound jarring me from a fitful sleep. I'd forgotten to silence my phone, a rare oversight in my new family-free protocol. The number wasn't blocked. It wasn't one I recognized at all, which is why I answered, fearing some emergency with a friend or colleague. "Hello?" I mumbled, still half asleep. "Audrey? It's Ryan." The voice on the other end was barely recognizable, tight with tension. I sat up immediately, fully awake now. "Ryan? How did you get this number?" "Your office." I told them it was a family emergency. His voice cracked on the word emergency. "It's Madison. She's in the hospital." My first thought, I'm ashamed to admit, was skepticism. Another Madison drama to pull me back into the family orbit? But something in Ryan's voice, a raw fear I'd never heard before, told me this was genuine. "What happened?" I asked, already getting out of bed, switching on lights. "She collapsed at our lake house. We just got back from Greece yesterday, and she said she felt tired, but I thought it was just jet lag. Then this morning, yesterday morning now, she couldn't get out of bed. By evening she was disoriented, and then she just collapsed. They think it's her kidneys." "Her kidneys?" I repeated, trying to process this information. Madison had always been healthy, almost annoyingly so. She was the type who did sunrise yoga and drank green smoothies while I survived on coffee and takeout during deadline weeks. "The doctors say it's acute kidney failure, something about an autoimmune reaction. I don't understand all of it." Ryan's voice broke completely. "Audrey, it's bad. They're talking about dialysis, maybe a transplant. Your parents are here, but I know things aren't good between you, but I thought you should know." I stood frozen in my bedroom, the phone pressed to my ear, as contradictory emotions washed over me: concern for my sister, resentment at being pulled back into family drama, guilt for that resentment, and beneath it all, a flicker of dark satisfaction that Madison's perfect life had finally encountered an obstacle. That last feeling shamed me most of all. "Where is she?" I asked, pushing aside my complicated emotions. "Boston Medical Center, ICU, 4th floor. I'll be there in a few hours," I promised, already calculating the earliest flight I could catch from Chicago. "Thank you," Ryan said, genuine relief in his voice. "I know she doesn't deserve it, after everything, but thank you." After booking the first morning flight to Boston, I sat on my bed, staring at the wall, trying to understand my own feelings. Why was I going? Was it sisterly love? Obligation? Morbid curiosity? I didn't know, but some gravitational force was pulling me back toward the family that had rejected me, and I didn't have the strength or perhaps the coldness to resist it. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fear when I arrived around noon. The ICU waiting room was a study in discomfort, hard plastic chairs, flickering fluorescent lights, and the constant background beep of distant monitors. My parents were huddled together near the window, my mother's makeup-free face, a shock of vulnerability I rarely witnessed. My father looked suddenly old, his shoulders hunched under his rumpled shirt. They didn't notice me at first, giving me a moment to observe them unguarded. My mother was crying silently, my father's arm around her in a rare display of physical affection. They looked broken in a way I'd never seen before, and despite everything, my heart ached for them. Ryan spotted me first, rising from a chair in the corner where he'd been staring at his phone. He looked terrible, unshaven, hair disheveled, wearing what appeared to be the same clothes from yesterday. "Audrey," he said, his voice hoarse. "You came!" The simple statement drew my parents' attention. My mother's eyes widened, a complex emotion crossing her face: surprise, relief, and something that looked almost like guilt. "Audrey," my father said, standing. "Thank God." The welcome was more effusive than any I'd received in years, and I understood immediately. They needed something from me. The realization was both bitter and clarifying. "How is she?" I asked, maintaining my distance. "Stable but critical," Ryan answered. "The doctors are running more tests. Her kidneys are failing, but they don't know exactly why. Some autoimmune response triggered by an infection, possibly. She picked up something in Greece." "What do the doctors say about her prognosis?" I kept my voice clinical, professional. My mother burst into fresh tears at the question. My father answered, his voice unsteady. "She needs a transplant. Soon. She's on the list, but..." The unspoken request hung in the air between us. I looked from my father to my mother to Ryan, understanding now why my presence was suddenly so welcome, so necessary. They needed a kidney, and I was the most likely match. The irony wasn't lost on me. There had been no place for me at Madison's wedding, but my organs were apparently welcome in her body. Ryan approached me cautiously, gesturing toward the hallway. "Can we talk? Privately?" I nodded, following him to a small alcove near the elevators, away from my parents' ears. "I need to be honest with you," Ryan said, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "Madison didn't want us to call you. Even now, she doesn't know you're here." I wasn't surprised, but the confirmation still hurt. "Then why did you call?" I asked. Ryan leaned against the wall, suddenly looking exhausted beyond measure. "Because I know what she did. With the wedding, I mean. I know she deliberately excluded you." This admission startled me. "She told you?" "Not exactly," he admitted. "After we got engaged, she talked about you being a bridesmaid. She seemed excited about it. Then suddenly she was making excuses. You were too busy. You weren't interested. You two weren't close enough." The stories kept changing. He looked at me directly, his eyes bloodshot but honest. "At the reception, when I saw you there, I believed her version that you were trying to cause drama. I'm sorry for that. It wasn't until we were in Greece that I found some emails she'd deleted. Messages from you about bridesmaid dresses and shower plans. She'd been lying to me." The validation of my experience was startling. For so long, Madison's version of reality had been accepted by everyone around her, my parents, extended family, mutual friends. To hear someone, especially her husband, acknowledge her deception felt like a weight lifting. "She's been jealous of you for years," Ryan continued. "Your independence, your career success, the fact that you built a life without needing anyone's approval or support. She talks about you more than you'd think, usually not kindly. But it's clear you occupy a significant space in her mind." Before I could respond to this revelation, a doctor appeared, calling for the Chapman family. Ryan touched my arm briefly before hurrying back to the waiting room, leaving me alone with this new perspective on my sister and the impossible decision I now faced. The following days blurred together in a haze of hospital fluorescence and difficult conversations. Medical tests confirmed what we already suspected. I was a compatible donor match for Madison, a 6 out of 6 antigen match, which the transplant coordinator described as the best possible scenario between siblings. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of being told how different we were, how Madison shined while I faded into the background, our biological compatibility was nearly perfect. Our blood and tissue spoke a language of connection that our hearts had long forgotten. My internal conflict raged without resolution. On the surface, the decision seemed simple: donate a kidney to save my sister's life. But beneath that simplicity lay years of hurt, betrayal, and deliberate exclusion. Each time I leaned toward agreeing to the donation, memories would surface: Madison's cruel teenage manipulations, my parents' constant favoritism, the wedding invitation that never came, the empty chair where my name should have been. "No one would blame you if you said no," Rachel told me during one of our late-night phone calls, her voice gentle but firm. "Family doesn't get unlimited chances to hurt you just because they share your DNA." Jordan was more direct. "These people only want you for spare parts. They didn't care about your presence until they needed your kidney." Even my therapist Eliza, who typically avoided giving direct advice, seemed concerned. "Whatever you decide, Audrey, make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. Not out of guilt or obligation, and not with the expectation that this sacrifice will heal family wounds." Medical reconciliation and emotional reconciliation are entirely different things. Their words echoed in my mind as I sat in Dr. Patel's office, listening to him explain the transplant process in detail. He was refreshingly honest about both the procedure and the recovery. "Kidney donation is major surgery," he explained, his manner both professional and compassionate. "The procedure itself takes 3 to 4 hours. Most donors stay in the hospital for 2 to 3 days afterward." He detailed the recovery process: 6 to 8 weeks before returning to normal activities, potential complications ranging from infection to chronic pain, the small but real long-term risks. "What I want to emphasize," Dr. Patel said, leaning forward slightly, "is that this is entirely your choice. There should be no pressure, no coercion. We have a separate team evaluating you as a donor specifically to protect your interests, independent from the recipient's medical team." I appreciated his directness, the way he spoke to me as an individual making my own medical decision, not just as Madison's potential donor. "What happens if I say no?" I asked, the question I'd been afraid to voice. "Then Madison remains on the transplant list. With her blood type and condition, the wait could be 3 to 5 years. In the meantime, she would require regular dialysis." "And her prognosis with dialysis?" Dr. Patel's expression grew more serious. "Dialysis is a treatment, not a cure. It's taxing on the body. The 5-year survival rate for patients on long-term dialysis is about 35%. The statistics hit me like a physical blow. Whatever my feelings toward Madison, the thought of her dying young, of my parents losing a child, felt unbearable. Yet I couldn't ignore the voice inside me questioning whether I was obligated to make this sacrifice for people who had repeatedly shown they valued me only when I was useful to them. I requested time to think, promising Dr. Patel I would have an answer within 48 hours. As I left his office, I found my parents in the hospital cafeteria, huddled over untouched coffee cups. Their appearances had deteriorated further. My father hadn't shaved in days, and my mother's typically immaculate hair hung limp around her face. I slid into the seat across from them, steeling myself for the conversation we needed to have. "I'm a match," I said without preamble. "Dr. Patel says it's a good one." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, thank God. So you'll do it? You'll donate?" Her immediate assumption that my compatibility equated to my consent sparked something in me, a lifetime of suppressed anger and hurt suddenly demanding expression. "I haven't decided yet," I said. my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. And your assumption that I would automatically say yes is exactly the problem. My father frowned. What are you talking about, Audrey? This is your sister's life. I know exactly whose life it is, I replied. The same sister who deliberately excluded me from her wedding, who has spent years making me feel unwelcome in this family. The sister you two have consistently favored and protected while dismissing my feelings and experiences. My mother's face hardened into the familiar expression of disapproval I'd grown up with. This is hardly the time to dredge up old grievances. Madison is fighting for her life. And that's terrible, I acknowledged. I wouldn't wish this situation on anyone. But this isn't about old grievances. It's about a pattern that has continued my entire life and culminated just 3 weeks ago when I was literally escorted out of Madison's wedding after being told I wasn't welcome. My father shifted uncomfortably. Madison explained that. She said you showed up uninvited and caused a scene. Did she tell you she deliberately lied to everyone about why I wasn't there? That she told people I was working in Europe when she had actually disinvited me from the bridal party and the wedding without explanation? My parents exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Ryan confirmed it, I added. He found emails I'd sent about bridesmaid duties, emails Madison deleted and never mentioned to him. She systematically erased me from her wedding and her life, and you both enabled it, just like you've always enabled her behavior. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but for once, they didn't seem manipulative, they seemed confused, perhaps even genuinely sorrowful. We didn't know, she said quietly. You never asked, I countered. You always accept Madison's version of events without question. You've spent my entire life making excuses for her and blaming me. When she stole my boyfriend at 16, you made me apologize to her. When she dropped out of college, you financed her Instagram career. When she excludes me from the most important day of her life, you tell me to be the bigger person. At what point do I get to be something other than Madison's doormat or her spare parts? The harsh words hung in the air between us. My father, never emotional, rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands. We've made mistakes, he admitted, his voice rough. Terrible mistakes, if what you're saying is true. But Audrey, please don't punish Madison for our failures as parents. It was perhaps the first time I'd ever heard my father acknowledge any parental shortcoming, and it momentarily disarmed me. Before I could respond, a nurse approached our table. Mr. and Mrs. Collins, your daughter is awake and asking for you. My mother stood immediately, her maternal instinct activated for Madison as it always had been. My father hesitated, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, regret perhaps, or simply exhaustion. We'll talk more later, he promised, before following my mother. Left alone at the cafeteria table, I felt the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Could I separate my feelings about my family from this medical reality? Was I capable of that level of compassion? That degree of detachment from my own hurt? And if I donated my kidney, would it truly be an act of love? Or would it be the ultimate capitulation to a lifetime of familial manipulation? I was still sitting there, turning these questions over in my mind, when I decided to do something I hadn't yet done: visit Madison herself. Whether I donated my kidney or not, I needed to see her, to confront the reality of her illness, and perhaps find some clarity in that confrontation. The ICU was quiet, except for the steady beep of monitors and the occasional hushed conversation among the nursing staff. My parents had left Madison's room to speak with a doctor, giving me an unexpected window of privacy. I hesitated at the doorway, steeling myself before entering. Madison looked smaller than I remembered, diminished against the white hospital sheets. Her typically perfect hair lay flat against the pillow, her skin pale beneath her tan, dark circles prominent under her closed eyes. Various tubes and wires connected her to machines monitoring her vital signs, and a dialysis port was visible at her collarbone. This was my sister, stripped of her carefully curated image, vulnerable, human, fragile. I moved closer, careful not to disturb any of the medical equipment. Madison's eyes fluttered open at my approach, taking a moment to focus. When recognition dawned, her expression registered surprise, followed quickly by what looked like shame. "Audrey," she whispered, her voice hoarse, "you're here." "I'm here," I confirmed, maintaining some distance from the bed. "Did they call you?" "About." She gestured weakly toward her body. Ryan called. "He thought I should know." Madison closed her eyes briefly. "I'm sorry," she said, so quietly I almost missed it. The simple apology, offered without qualification or explanation, caught me off guard. Was it for the current situation? For the wedding? For years of competitive hostility? I didn't ask, and Madison didn't clarify. Instead, my mind flashed unexpectedly to a childhood memory. Madison, at 7 years old, standing up to a neighborhood bully who had pushed me off my bike. Tiny Madison, fists clenched at her sides, yelling, "That's my sister. Don't you touch her." The memory was so vivid, so at odds with our current relationship, that it momentarily disoriented me. Had we really come so far from those children who had once protected each other? When had the shift occurred? Was it a sudden break? Or had we drifted gradually apart, pushed by parental favoritism and pulled by our own insecurities until we became strangers with shared DNA? I realized with a start that Madison was crying silently, tears tracking down her temples into her hair. Whether from physical pain, fear of her condition, or genuine remorse, I couldn't tell. Perhaps it was all three. I stood there, watching my sister cry, feeling the weight of our complicated history, alongside the simple biological fact of our connection, the same connection that made my kidney such a perfect match for hers. In that moment, the decision still eluded me, but I began to understand that whatever choice I made would define not just Madison's future, but my own as well. The hospital cafeteria at 3 a.m. was a liminal space, existing somewhere between reality and dream. Harsh fluorescent lights illuminated the nearly empty room, the occasional doctor or nurse passing through for coffee strong enough to fuel the graveyard shift. I sat at a corner table, nursing my third cup of mediocre tea, when Ryan appeared in the doorway, scanning the room until his eyes found me. He looked even worse than before, if that was possible. His clothes hung on his frame, as if he'd lost weight in just the few days since Madison had been hospitalized, and the dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept in as long. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, stopping at my table. I gestured to the empty chair across from me. "Couldn't sleep either?" "Haven't really tried," he admitted, setting down his coffee cup. "Too much on my mind. The doctors are talking about starting Madison on a more aggressive dialysis regimen tomorrow." I nodded, unsure what to say. The awkwardness between us was palpable. The last time we'd spoken directly had been at the wedding when he'd had me escorted out. "I need to tell you something," Ryan said abruptly, his voice low and intense. "Something I probably should have told you earlier." My guard immediately went up. "What is it?" "I think Madison has been systematically undermining your relationship with your family for years." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Not just the wedding stuff. I think it goes much deeper." "What makes you say that?" I asked, though part of me had always suspected something similar. Ryan reached for his messenger bag, which I hadn't noticed he'd brought with him. From it, he withdrew a leather-bound journal. "This is Madison's. I brought it from home thinking it might have information about medications or health issues that could help the doctors. But what I found instead..." He pushed the journal toward me, then seemed to reconsider. "Actually, maybe I should just tell you. It feels wrong to have you read her private thoughts." "I appreciate that," I said, genuinely relieved not to face the ethical dilemma of reading my sister's diary. Ryan took a deep breath. "Madison has been intercepting your messages to your parents for years. Emails you sent that were never answered? Birthday cards that got no response? She accessed your parents' email account and deleted messages from you. She'd collect your mail when she visited them and throw away anything from you." My mind reeled at this revelation. I had attributed the increasing distance with my parents to their preference for Madison, never suspecting active sabotage. "How do you know this?" I managed to ask. It's all in her journal. She writes about it like she's protecting them from you. Like she believes you're somehow toxic to the family. Ryan's face reflected genuine distress. The most recent entry was about the wedding. She writes about deliberately making sure you wouldn't have a place, about telling the wedding planner to deny you entry if you showed up. I felt sick, the tea turning sour in my stomach. The systematic nature of Madison's actions went beyond sibling rivalry or momentary cruelty. It suggested a calculated campaign to isolate me from my family. There's more, Ryan said, his voice dropping even lower. She had your invitation to our engagement party returned to sender. She blocked your number on your parents' phones at one point. He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. She even posed as you in an email to decline an invitation to your father's retirement party 2 years ago. Said you were too busy with work to attend. The party I never knew about. The celebration for my father's 40 years at the same company, an achievement he'd talked about since I was a child. I'd wondered why I hadn't been included, had added it to the mental list of family events deemed not important enough to include me. Why? I whispered. The single word encompassing all my confusion and hurt. Ryan looked genuinely troubled. Her journal suggests she's been deeply jealous of you for years. Your independence, your career success, the life you built without family support. She writes about feeling like she can't measure up to you, about how your parents always talked about your achievements when you weren't around. This alternative reality was so at odds with my experience that I almost laughed. My parents have spent my entire life comparing me unfavorably to Madison. They funded her influencer career while I worked multiple jobs through college. They've consistently chosen her over me in every conflict. To your face, Ryan countered. But according to Madison's writings, behind your back they would praise your accomplishments, your resilience, your intelligence. She felt like she was living in your shadow despite all the outward favoritism. I struggled to reconcile this information with the family dynamics I'd experienced firsthand. Could my parents really have expressed pride in me when I wasn't there to hear it? Had Madison's insecurity driven her to such extreme measures to maintain her position as the favorite child? Ryan wasn't finished with his revelations. There's something else you should know. Something about our financial situation. I don't see how that's relevant, I said, uncomfortable with this additional invasion of Madison's privacy. It is when it affects your family directly, Ryan insisted. Madison has a shopping addiction. A serious one. She's maxed out multiple credit cards, taken loans I didn't know about. Your parents have been bailing her out financially for years. That's hardly news, I said. They've always funded her lifestyle. No, Audrey. I mean, they've been seriously compromising their own financial security to cover her debts. According to what I found, they remortgaged their house last year to pay off $100,000 in credit card debt she'd accumulated. This information hit differently. My parents were not wealthy, comfortable, middle-class people who had worked hard their entire lives. The house they'd remortgaged was the same one I'd grown up in, the one they'd planned to retire in debt-free. Madison writes about the guilt she feels, but also about how she can't stop. How each purchase gives her temporary relief from the pressure she feels to maintain her image, her social media presence. Ryan looked genuinely distressed. I knew she liked to shop, but I had no idea how deep it went. She's been hiding purchases, lying about expenditures. There are storage units full of unused items she's never even taken out of the packaging. I sat back in my chair, trying to process all this information. The Madison described in her journal was almost unrecognizable, deeply insecure, pathologically jealous, financially destructive, yet also racked with guilt and shame about her behavior. It painted a picture not of a privileged golden child, but of a deeply troubled woman spiraling out of control behind a carefully maintained facade of perfection. "Why are you telling me all this?" I finally asked. "She's your wife." Ryan's expression was complicated love and concern, mixed with disillusionment and betrayal. "Because I love her, and I want her to get better, not just physically but mentally. This can't continue." and because I think you deserve to know the truth before you make your decision about the transplant." He reached across the table, not quite touching my hand, but close. "I'm not asking you to donate your kidney. That's entirely your choice. But I wanted you to understand what you're dealing with. Madison needs help beyond what medicine can provide." "You're suggesting she needs psychiatric help," I said, the realization dawning. Ryan nodded. "I've already spoken to a therapist who specializes in addiction and family dynamics. When Madison recovers from this health crisis, I'm going to insist on therapy as a condition of our marriage continuing." This unexpected ally, my sister's husband, who a week ago had been a stranger at best and an adversary at worst, had suddenly provided context that shifted my understanding of the family dynamics that had shaped my life. Not enough to erase the hurt Madison had caused, but enough to complicate my perception of her as simply malicious or entitled. "I need to think about all this," I said finally, overwhelmed by the revelations. "Of course," Ryan agreed, standing. "Whatever you decide about the transplant, I'll support you. And regardless of what happens with Madison and me going forward, I think you deserve to have a relationship with your parents based on truth, not manipulation." As he turned to leave, I called after him. "Ryan?" He paused, looking back at me. "Thank you for being honest." He nodded once, his expression somber. Sometimes the people we love aren't who we thought they were. But that doesn't necessarily mean we should stop loving them. It might just mean we need to love them differently. As I watched him walk away, those words echoed in my mind. Perhaps that was the key to my decision about the transplant, not whether to help Madison, but how to do so in a way that didn't perpetuate the unhealthy dynamics that had defined our relationship for so long. Not a gift given out of guilt or obligation, but one offered with clear boundaries and honest expectations. For the first time since receiving Ryan's middle-of-the-night call, I felt the beginnings of clarity forming within me. Not an easy answer, but at least a path forward that honored both my sister's need and my own worth. The morning after my late-night conversation with Ryan, I woke with unexpected clarity. The decision that had seemed impossible just hours before now felt obvious, though not easy. I would donate my kidney to Madison, not because I owed it to her or because our parents expected it, but because it aligned with my own values and the person I wanted to be. I called Dr. Patel's office as soon as it opened, scheduling an appointment to formally consent to the donation and begin the final preparations. When the transplant coordinator asked if I wanted to share the news with Madison personally, I declined. I wasn't ready for that conversation yet, for the complex emotions it would inevitably trigger. There would be time for words later. For now, action was enough. The next few days passed in a blur of medical tests, psychological evaluations, and legal paperwork. I learned more about kidneys than I ever thought possible. Their function, location, the intricacies of transplantation. I signed forms acknowledging risks ranging from infection to chronic pain to death, initialing each paragraph with a surreal detachment, as if I were agreeing to terms and conditions for a software update rather than major organ donation. Throughout this process, I maintained emotional distance from my family. I answered my parents' calls but kept conversations brief and clinical. Yes, I was donating. No, I didn't need anything from them. Yes, the surgery was scheduled for Tuesday. The gratitude in their voices was evident, but I deflected their thanks, uncomfortable with being the hero in a family dynamic that had cast me as peripheral for so long. The night before the surgery, alone in my hotel room near the hospital, I wrote a letter not to Madison or my parents, but to myself. It was a reminder of why I was doing this, of the boundaries I intended to maintain going forward, of the self-worth I refused to compromise regardless of the outcome. I sealed the letter in an envelope, tucked it into my overnight bag, and tried to sleep despite the anxiety coursing through my veins. Morning arrived too quickly. At the hospital, I was separated from my family, taken to a different floor for preoperative preparation, while Madison was readied elsewhere. The medical team was efficient and kind, explaining each step as they inserted IVs, checked vital signs, and reviewed the procedure one final time. Dr. Patel visited briefly before the surgery, his calm presence reassuring. "We'll take good care of both of you," he promised, squeezing my hand gently. "Your kidney will begin working in your sister almost immediately." The anesthesiologist arrived next, explaining the medication that would soon render me unconscious. As the drugs entered my system, my last conscious thought was surprisingly clear. Regardless of what happened next, I had made this choice from a place of strength, not weakness. I awoke hours later to the muted beep of monitors and the disorienting fog of post-anesthesia confusion. The pain came in waves, sharp when I tried to move, dull when I lay still. A nurse appeared at my side, checking my vitals and adjusting my pain medication. "How did it go?" I managed to ask, my voice raspy from the breathing tube. "Textbook procedure," she assured me. "Dr. Patel will be by shortly to give you the full update." "My sister?" The question felt strange on my tongue, acknowledging a connection I'd been trying to sever. "Already showing good signs. Your kidney is doing its job." Relief washed over me, followed immediately by exhaustion. I drifted back to sleep before I could ask anything else. The next days were a haze of pain management, cautious movement, and gradual recovery. I learned that Madison was doing well, her body accepting my kidney without complications. Our parents divided their time between her room and mine, though they spent considerably more hours at her bedside, a fact that stung despite its predictability. What I hadn't anticipated was the difficulty of my own recovery. The surgery, while successful, had been more traumatic to my body than I'd expected. Pain radiated from the incision site, making even shallow breaths challenging. Walking to the bathroom required assistance and left me exhausted. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by medication schedules and vital checks. On the third day post-surgery, I developed a fever. What began as a slight temperature elevation quickly spiked to 103 degrees, signaling a post-operative infection that required aggressive antibiotic treatment and an extended hospital stay. The medical team assured me this was a known complication, treatable but serious, requiring close monitoring. During this setback, I noticed that my parents' already brief visits became even more sporadic. When my father did appear, he seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone. My mother made excuses about needing to help Madison, who had been discharged to a private room on a different floor while I remained in intensive care. "She's having a hard time with the anti-rejection medications," my mother explained, her hand already on the doorknob as she prepared to leave after a 10-minute visit. "The side effects are quite severe." I nodded, too weak to point out that I was currently fighting an infection that could potentially become septic. Too exhausted to mention that not once had either of them asked how I was feeling, what my doctors were saying, or if I needed anything. The pattern was so familiar, it almost felt comfortable, Madison's needs superseding mine, my sacrifice acknowledged, but ultimately secondary to her comfort. It was my friends who filled the void my family left. Rachel flew in from Chicago, taking a week of personal leave to sit by my bedside. Jordan sent elaborate food delivery orders to the hospital for Rachel, knowing the cafeteria options were dismal. My team at work organized a rotation of video calls, keeping me company during long afternoons when pain made sleep impossible, but weakness prevented other activities. By the time I was finally discharged, 8 days after the surgery, Madison had been home for nearly a week. According to my parents, she was recovering beautifully in the comfort of her and Ryan's lakeside home, with a private nurse to monitor her condition and adjust her medications as needed. I returned to my hotel room with Rachel's help, facing another week in Boston before I would be cleared to fly home to Chicago. The contrast between Madison's recovery circumstances and my own was stark. Her with round-the-clock professional care in a luxurious setting, me managing pain medications and wound care alone in a mid-range hotel, relying on food delivery apps and Rachel's assistance during her limited time away from work. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had given Madison a literal piece of myself, yet the aftercare disparity perfectly encapsulated our lifelong dynamic. Even in this most profound act of giving, I remained an afterthought to my family. My needs secondary, my comfort optional. You should say something, Rachel insisted one evening, watching me wince as I tried to find a comfortable position on the hotel bed. Your parents should know how you're struggling. What would be the point? I asked, exhaustion making my voice flat. It wouldn't change anything. It never has. Then why did you do it? Rachel's frustration was evident. Why give Madison your kidney if you knew nothing would change? I considered the question carefully. I didn't do it to change them. I did it to honor who I am, regardless of how they treat me. Their response or lack thereof doesn't invalidate my choice. Rachel's expression softened. You're a better person than I would be in your situation. Not better, I corrected. Just making the choices I can live with. As my physical recovery progressed, I began to understand that the true healing, the emotional reconciliation I had perhaps subconsciously hoped might follow this medical one, would be a much longer and less certain process. My kidney now lived in Madison's body, filtering her blood, sustaining her life. But the distance between us remained, a gap too wide to be bridged by shared organs alone. 3 weeks after the transplant, with my strength slowly returning and the worst of the infection behind me, I accepted my parents' invitation to dinner at their home. Madison and Ryan would be there, her first social outing since the surgery. I agreed partly out of curiosity, partly out of a sense that this chapter needed proper closure before I returned to Chicago. The evening was unseasonably cool for July. A light rain tapping against the windows of my childhood home as I stood on the porch, gathering courage before ringing the doorbell. I felt like a visitor at a house where I had once belonged, an outsider returning to familiar territory now made foreign by time and circumstance. My father answered, his smile tentative. Audrey, you look better. It wasn't entirely true. I was still 15 pounds lighter than before the surgery, my clothes hanging loose on my frame, dark circles prominent beneath my eyes. But I appreciated the effort. Thanks for having me, I replied, stepping into the entryway that smelled of my mother's signature pot, roast the same meals she'd prepared for special occasions throughout my childhood. In the living room, Madison sat on the couch, looking remarkably recovered. Her color had returned, her hair perfectly styled, dressed in an expensive-looking loungewear set that somehow managed to look both comfortable and elegant. Ryan sat beside her, his hand resting protectively near hers, his eyes meeting mine with a complexity our shared secrets warranted. Audrey, Madison acknowledged me with a slight nod. No hug, no explicit thanks for the organ currently functioning inside her body. Just my name, spoken as if we were distant acquaintances. My mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. Perfect timing. Dinner's just ready. We moved to the dining room, taking our traditional seats at the table, my father at the head, my mother at the foot, Madison and Ryan on one side, me alone on the other. The family configuration I'd known my entire life, the empty space beside me a physical manifestation of my perpetual outsider status. Conversation during the meal was strained, dominated by detailed accounts of Madison's recovery, the effectiveness of her medications, her follow-up appointments, the special diet her nutritionist had designed. My mother described the renovation they were planning for the guest room so Madison can stay comfortably when she needs extra care. No one asked about my recovery. No one mentioned my infection, my extended hospital stay, or my ongoing pain management. It was as if my part in this medical drama had concluded the moment my kidney was removed, my subsequent experience irrelevant to the narrative. I ate silently, observing the familiar dynamics with new perspective. Ryan caught my eye occasionally, his expression apologetic, but he said little, seeming uncomfortable with the unbalanced conversation. It was during dessert, my mother's apple pie, Madison's favorite, that the carefully maintained facade began to crack. Madison, reaching for the water pitcher, winced slightly. "Are you in pain, sweetie?" my mother asked immediately, half rising from her chair. "Just a twinge," Madison replied. "The doctor said it's normal." "I can get your medication," my father offered, already standing. "It's okay," Madison assured them, then added with a casual cruelty that took my breath away. It's nothing compared to what I've been through. This recovery is brutal. The statement hung in the air, its audacity momentarily silencing the table. I set down my fork deliberately, the small clink against china somehow deafening in the sudden quiet. What you've been through, I repeated, my voice controlled despite the anger flaring within me. Interesting phrasing, considering I underwent the same surgery and donated an organ. Madison's expression flickered between surprise and defensiveness. Obviously, it's different. You chose to have surgery. I was fighting for my life. Yes, I chose to give you my kidney. A choice I made despite how you've treated me, including deliberately excluding me from your wedding. Audrey, my mother interjected, her tone warning. This isn't the time. When is the time, Mom? I asked, turning to her. When has there ever been a time in this family when my feelings, my experiences, were considered important enough to acknowledge? My father cleared his throat uncomfortably. We're all very grateful for your donation, Audrey. No one is disputing that. Grateful? I repeated. Is that what you call this? I developed a serious infection after surgery. I spent 8 days in the hospital while you were all celebrating Madison's beautiful recovery. I'm still in pain, still on antibiotics, still unable to work or live normally. Has anyone at this table even asked how I'm doing? Madison rolled her eyes, the gesture so dismissive it momentarily stunned me. Always the victim, aren't you? You donate a kidney and expect everyone to worship you for it. Madison, Ryan said sharply, speaking for the first time since we sat down. That's enough. What? She demanded, turning to him. You know how she is. Everything's always about Audrey and how no one appreciates her enough. Ryan's expression hardened. No. Everything has always been about you, and how everyone else should accommodate your needs regardless of the cost. The unexpected defense from Madison's husband created an instant shift in the room's atmosphere. My parents exchanged alarmed glances, clearly unaccustomed to anyone challenging the family's Madison-centric reality. What's that supposed to mean? Madison asked, her voice rising. Ryan looked at me briefly, an unspoken question in his eyes. I nodded slightly, giving permission for whatever was coming next. It means I know what you did, he said quietly. I know you deliberately excluded Audrey from our wedding. I found the emails you deleted, the messages you intercepted. I know you've been systematically isolating her from your family for years. My mother gasped. What are you talking about? Ryan turned to my parents. Madison has been intercepting Audrey's messages to you, deleting her emails from your accounts, throwing away cards and letters. She's been creating artificial distance between you and your older daughter for years. That's ridiculous, Madison scoffed, but her face had paled noticeably. Why would I do that? According to your own journal, Ryan continued relentlessly, because you're jealous of her independence and success, because you're insecure about your own choices and accomplishments. You read my journal? Madison's voice cracked with genuine outrage. I was looking for medical information when you were hospitalized, Ryan explained. Instead, I found detailed accounts of how you've been manipulating your family for years. My father's face had gone ashen. Is this true, Madison? Of course not, she protested, but her denial lacked conviction. Ryan's twisting things. I have the journal, Ryan said quietly. I can show them exactly what you wrote. Madison turned to our parents, her expression shifting to the vulnerable, tearful look that had worked so effectively throughout our childhood. Mom, Dad, you can't believe this. You know me. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. I don't understand. Why would you do such a thing? She didn't, my father said firmly, though doubt had begun to cloud his eyes. There must be some explanation. There is, I said, finally finding my voice again. The explanation is that Madison has been the center of this family her entire life, and she couldn't tolerate any attention or affection directed toward me. So she made sure it never happened. That's not fair, Madison protested, tears now flowing freely. You left. You moved away and built your perfect independent life, while I stayed and took care of Mom and Dad. Took care of them? I repeated incredulously. Is that what you call forcing them to remortgage their house to pay off your shopping debts? This revelation landed like a physical blow. My mother's face drained of color. My father's hand, reaching for his napkin, froze midair. What is she talking about? My mother asked Madison, her voice barely audible. Madison's gaze darted between our parents, panic replacing the calculated tears. I was going to pay it back. I just needed help temporarily. $100,000 in credit card debt is not temporary help, I said. And from what Ryan found, it wasn't the first time, was it? You told us it was 20,000, my father said slowly, the pieces visibly falling into place in his mind. You said it was a one-time thing, an investment in your brand that went wrong. It was, Madison insisted. Audrey's exaggerating. No, she's not, Ryan said, his voice heavy with resignation. I found the loan documents. I know what you borrowed and why. It wasn't for your business. It was for clothes, jewelry, home decor things you've hidden in storage units because you didn't even want me to know about them. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's hand covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. My father stared at Madison as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Madison, realizing the game was up, switched tactics with the agility of a lifetime performer. I'm sick, she said, her voice suddenly weak. I can't handle this right now. I need to rest. She started to rise, swaying slightly for dramatic effect, but Ryan remained seated, forcing her to either leave without him or abandon the exit strategy. We need to talk about this, he said firmly. All of us. No more secrets, no more manipulation. Madison's expression hardened, the vulnerable patient act dropping away to reveal cold anger. Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I kept Audrey away from the family. Because every time she did show up, all I heard was how successful she was, how independent, how she never asked for anything while I was supposedly such a burden. She turned to me, years of resentment evident in her glare. You think you're so perfect with your corporate job and your self-sufficient life. You have no idea what it's like to live up to impossible standards, to be compared constantly to someone who doesn't even care enough to be present. Madison, my mother began, but Madison cut her off. No, let me finish. You two, she pointed at our parents, would praise Audrey behind her back but criticize me to my face. Why can't you be more like your sister? Look how Audrey paid for her own college. See how Audrey never asks for help. It was never-ending. I stared at her, trying to reconcile this version of reality with my own experience. Had our parents really praised me in my absence while criticizing me to my face? The possibility was disorienting. So yes, Madison continued, defiant now, I made sure she stayed away. I made sure her precious emails and calls didn't get through. And yes, I didn't want her at my wedding because for once, just once, I wanted a day that was entirely about me, without anyone mentally comparing me to perfect Audrey. The raw honesty of her outburst silenced the table. For the first time, I glimpsed the genuine pain behind Madison's actions, the insecurity and jealousy that had driven her behavior. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it provided context I'd never fully understood before. My father broke the silence, his voice uncharacteristically emotional. "We failed both of you," he said simply. "In different ways, but just as completely." My mother nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I never realized. I never saw how our words affected either of you." Madison stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I need some air," she announced, before striding from the room. Ryan hesitated, torn between following his wife and continuing the long-overdue conversation. "I should check on her," he said finally, though his reluctance was evident. "But this isn't over. We need to address everything, the financial situation, the family dynamics, all of it." After he left, I found myself alone with my parents for the first time in years. The three of us sat in stunned silence, the remnants of dinner growing cold on our plates, the family secrets we'd just exposed even colder between us. I never knew she felt that way, my mother finally said, her voice small. About being compared to you. And I never knew you spoke positively about me when I wasn't around, I countered. All I ever heard were criticisms and comparisons in Madison's favor. My father ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. We've made a mess of things, haven't we? With both of you. It wasn't a question, and it required no answer. The truth of his statement hung in the air, acknowledged by all three of us in the heavy silence that followed. For the first time in my memory, we sat together, not as the roles we'd always played, the critical parents and the less favored daughter, but simply as three people confronting the painful reality of a family system that had damaged everyone within it. The rain outside had intensified, drumming against the windows like an insistent reminder that some storms must be weathered before clarity can emerge. As I looked at my parents' stunned faces, I realized that the truth, however painful, had finally broken through decades of dysfunctional patterns. What we would build in its place remained uncertain, but at least now we were operating from reality rather than illusion. Madison's kidney, my kidney, was functioning inside her body, sustaining her life. But the transplant that might ultimately save our family had nothing to do with organs and everything to do with honesty, however belated and painful it might be. The family dinner that exposed years of manipulation and resentment became a dividing line in our collective history, a clear demarcation between the dysfunctional dynamics that had defined us and whatever would come next. The immediate aftermath was predictably messy, with Madison refusing to speak to any of us for weeks, my parents struggling to process both their daughter's deception and their own culpability, and Ryan caught in the crossfire of a marriage suddenly built on shifting ground. I returned to Chicago as scheduled, grateful for the physical distance as I continued my recovery and emotional processing. The 800 miles between us provided breathing room that allowed for reflection without the pressure of immediate reconciliation. Madison's carefully curated online presence began to show cracks within days of our confrontation. The perfectly composed Instagram posts became less frequent, then stopped entirely. A scheduled brand partnership with a luxury skincare line was abruptly canceled. Rumors circulated among mutual acquaintances about erratic behavior and public arguments with Ryan. The collapse accelerated when Ryan, after attempting counseling for several months, filed for legal separation. The news reached me via my father, who called one Sunday evening, his voice heavy with concern. "Ryan's moved out," he reported. "Madison's not handling it well." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I took no pleasure in my sister's pain. "He says she refuses to acknowledge any wrongdoing, won't participate meaningfully in therapy." My father sighed deeply. "He's worried about her spending, says she's been maxing out credit cards again since the separation." The financial aspects of Madison's downward spiral soon became public when her leased Mercedes was repossessed, an event unfortunately captured by a former social media rival and shared widely among their mutual followers. Without Ryan's income, and with her own influencer career faltering, Madison's facade of affluence crumbled rapidly. My parents, finally forced to confront the extent of their enabling, made the difficult decision not to intervene financially this time. My father, who had already delayed his retirement to address the previous remortgage situation, held firm despite obvious emotional distress. "We can't keep rescuing her from consequences," he told me during one of our increasingly frequent phone calls. "I see that now, though it breaks my heart." This shift in approach represented a fundamental change in my parents' relationship with Madison. For perhaps the first time in her life, she was being held accountable rather than protected. The adjustment was clearly painful for all involved. While Madison's carefully constructed life disintegrated, my own underwent a different kind of transformation. Physically, my recovery progressed steadily. 6 months after the surgery, I had regained most of my strength and returned to my normal work schedule. The visible scar along my abdomen faded from angry red to silvery pink, a permanent reminder of both sacrifice and strength. Professionally, I found myself re-evaluating priorities. The experience of serious illness and recovery had shifted my perspective on work-life balance, prompting me to reduce my 60-hour work weeks to a more sustainable schedule. When a senior position opened in our New York office, I surprised myself by declining to apply, choosing instead to remain in Chicago near my support network of friends who had proven their value during my recovery. Most significantly, I began speaking publicly about my experience as a kidney donor. What started as participation in a hospital support group evolved into facilitating my own weekly meeting for family scapegoats and black sheep people who, like me, had complicated relationships with relatives who both needed and resented them. Family dynamics create patterns that can persist for generations unless someone actively breaks the cycle, I explained to the group during our first session. Being the one to set boundaries and seek healthier relationships doesn't make you the villain, even if your family casts you in that role. The group quickly became a highlight of my week, a place where shared experiences created understanding that was often impossible to find elsewhere. The validation of hearing others articulate feelings I'd harbored silently for years proved powerfully healing. Parallel to these external changes, I committed to internal work as well, beginning therapy with Dr. Linden, a specialist in family systems and trauma. Our weekly sessions helped me understand the multi-generational patterns that had shaped our family dynamics. Your parents likely repeated patterns from their own upbringings, Dr. Linden suggested during one particularly insightful session. This doesn't excuse their behavior, but it might help you contextualize it. Through therapy, I began to recognize how my own responses had sometimes perpetuated unhealthy dynamics, how my withdrawal had occasionally reinforced my outsider status, how my need for approval had kept me seeking validation from people unable to provide it. Healing doesn't necessarily mean reconciliation, Dr. Linden reminded me often. It means reaching a place where your well-being isn't dependent on others' recognition or approval. This perspective proved invaluable when, approximately 9 months after the transplant, I began cautiously rebuilding relationship with my parents. Our interactions, initially limited to brief phone calls, gradually expanded to include video chats and eventually an in-person visit when they traveled to Chicago for a weekend. The reunion was awkward but sincere, marked by tentative efforts at genuine connection. My father, never emotionally expressive in the past, made visible efforts to engage with my life and interests. My mother, though still prone to social performance, showed flashes of authentic presence. "We've started seeing a therapist too," my father confided during a quiet moment. "Your mother was resistant at first, but after everything with Madison, well, we realized we needed help understanding how we contributed to the situation." This admission, simple yet profound, represented a seismic shift in my parents' self-awareness. Their willingness to examine their own behavior, however belated, opened possibilities for relationship I had previously thought impossible. Madison remained the conspicuous absence in these cautious family rebuilding efforts. According to my parents, she had moved to a smaller apartment in a less prestigious neighborhood, taken a conventional job at a department store cosmetics counter, and maintained minimal contact with the family. "She refuses to discuss anything related to the past," my mother explained during one visit. "Just changes the subject or ends the call if we bring it up." I felt genuine compassion for my sister's struggle. The collapse of her marriage, career, and financial security, combined with the public nature of her downfall, would be devastating for anyone, let alone someone whose identity had been so thoroughly tied to external validation and appearance. The 1-year anniversary of the transplant arrived with a symbolism impossible to ignore. My kidney had been functioning in Madison's body for 12 months, filtering toxins and sustaining life, even as we remained estranged. To mark the occasion, I organized a fundraiser for the National Kidney Foundation, channeling my experience into advocacy for organ donation awareness and support for donors. The event, held at a Chicago gallery space, drew a substantial crowd: friends, colleagues, members of my support group, and even a few distant relatives who had reached out after learning the full story of our family dynamics. Ryan attended, having maintained occasional contact after his separation from Madison. He arrived late, slipping in during the presentation portion, but sought me out afterward. "You look well," he observed, his own appearance notably improved from the haggard, stressed man I'd last seen at my parents' dinner table. "Healthy." "So do you," I replied, noting the absence of the haunted expression he'd worn throughout Madison's illness and our subsequent family implosion. "I filed for divorce last month," he said, without preamble. Madison contested initially, but her lawyer eventually convinced her to accept the settlement terms. I nodded, unsure how to respond. Though Ryan and I had formed an unexpected alliance during Madison's illness, our connection remained complicated by his relationship with my sister. "I wanted you to know that despite everything, I don't regret our marriage," he continued. "It brought you back into your family's orbit, however painfully. And that led to truths that needed to emerge. At quite a cost to you," I observed. Ryan shrugged slightly. "I'm rebuilding. New apartment, focusing on work. Dating again, actually." He smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "Life moves forward, right?" "It does," I agreed, feeling a sudden kinship with this man who had married my sister, but ultimately helped expose the dynamics that had damaged our family for decades. "Are you in touch with Madison at all?" "Minimal contact through lawyers," he said. "I tried maintaining a friendship, but she wasn't interested unless I was willing to pretend the past never happened." The description aligned perfectly with Madison's longtime approach to conflict denial, deflection, and rewriting of history to protect her self-image. I wondered if she would ever develop the self-awareness necessary to break this pattern, or if she would continue recreating the same dynamics in new relationships throughout her life. As Ryan prepared to leave, he hesitated, then said quietly, "Your sister isn't a villain, Audrey. She's damaged, and she's caused damage, but there's goodness in her too. I saw it sometimes, in private moments when she didn't feel she had to perform or compete. I hope someday she finds a way to let that part of herself lead." His words stayed with me long after the event concluded. In the midst of establishing boundaries and pursuing my own healing, I had sometimes reduced Madison to a one-dimensional antagonist in my life story. Ryan's gentle reminder of her humanity, flawed, complex, and worthy of compassion, despite her actions, offered a more nuanced perspective I needed to incorporate into my own healing journey. That night, alone in my condo after the successful fundraiser, I stood before the bathroom mirror and examined the scar on my abdomen, the physical reminder of both sacrifice and strength. Somewhere across the country, my sister carried a matching scar and a functioning kidney that had once been mine. Whatever happened or didn't happen between us going forward, this biological connection would remain, a permanent link transcending emotional distance. I placed my hand gently over the scar tissue, acknowledging both the pain and the healing it represented. "We are connected," I whispered to my reflection, "but we are not defined by each other." In that moment of quiet self-recognition, I understood that my transformation was not about my relationship with Madison or my parents, but about my relationship with myself. The kidney donation, undertaken for complex reasons, including genuine compassion, familial obligation, and perhaps unconscious hope for recognition, had ultimately become a catalyst for authentic self-definition, independent of family roles or approval. Whatever the future held, I was no longer the overlooked daughter or the convenient donor. I was simply Audrey, complete, worthy, and finally centered in my own life story. 18 months after the transplant, on a crisp autumn afternoon, I opened my door to find Madison standing on my welcome mat. The sight was so unexpected, so divorced from anything I had anticipated for the day, that I momentarily wondered if stress had finally triggered hallucinations. "Hi," she said, her voice smaller than I remembered. "Can I come in?" Madison looked different, thinner, less polished, her designer clothes replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. The carefully maintained highlights had grown out, revealing her natural sandy blonde. Most striking was the absence of the confident, slightly superior expression that had been her default in my presence for as long as I could remember. I stepped aside wordlessly, allowing her into my space. As she entered, I noticed she carried a small gift bag, which she clutched like a shield. "Your place is nice," she commented, glancing around my living room with what seemed like genuine interest rather than the evaluative assessment I would have expected. "It feels like you." "Thanks," I replied, still processing the reality of my sister standing in my home after all this time. "Would you like something to drink? Coffee? Water?" "Water would be great." She followed me to the kitchen, maintaining a respectful distance as if uncertain of her welcome. As I filled 2 glasses, questions tumbled through my mind. How had she found my address? What prompted this unexpected visit? Why now, after 18 months of silence? We settled in my living room, Madison perching tentatively on the edge of the sofa while I took the adjacent armchair. For several moments, neither of us spoke, the ticking of the wall clock marking the passage of uncomfortable silence. "I've been in therapy," Madison finally said, looking down at her hands rather than at me. "Twice a week for the past year. It was part of my divorce settlement with Ryan. He agreed to a more favorable financial arrangement if I committed to getting help." I nodded, unsurprised that Ryan had found a way to encourage her toward healing even as he extricated himself from their marriage. "I didn't take it seriously at first," she continued. "I went through the motions, said what I thought the therapist wanted to hear. But eventually," she hesitated, seeming to search for words. "Eventually I couldn't maintain the pretense. It was exhausting, constantly defending actions I knew were wrong." She looked up then, meeting my eyes directly. "I've been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder with borderline features. And shopping addiction, though that's more a symptom than a separate condition." The clinical terms hung in the air between us. I had suspected something similar based on her patterns of behavior, but hearing her acknowledge it represented a level of self-awareness I hadn't thought possible. "That must have been difficult to hear," I said carefully. A sad smile flickered across her face. "Not as difficult as facing what I've done to you, to our parents, to Ryan." She reached for the gift bag she'd set beside her, then hesitated. "I brought something, but now I'm worried it will seem trivial compared to everything that needs to be said." "Why don't you show me anyway?" I suggested. Madison handed me the bag. Inside, I found a small velvet box. Opening it revealed a silver bracelet with a simple kidney-shaped charm. "It's been 1.5 years since the transplant," she said quietly. "I wanted to acknowledge that, to thank you properly, which I never did at the time." I ran my finger over the delicate charm, unexpectedly moved by the gesture. "It's beautiful. Thank you." "I don't expect forgiveness," Madison added quickly. "I'm not here to ask for that. My therapist has helped me understand that reconciliation, if it happens at all, is a long process that can't be rushed or forced." "Why are you here, then?" I asked, not unkindly but needing clarity. Madison took a deep breath, to acknowledge the truth. "To tell you that I understand now how I manipulated and hurt you throughout our lives. To take responsibility for my actions without excuses or deflection." She paused, swallowing hard. "And to let you know that I'm working to change, even though I know that doesn't erase the past." It was perhaps the most genuine communication we'd ever had. No performance, no hidden agenda, just raw honesty offered without expectation of specific response. "I appreciate that," I said, feeling my way carefully through unfamiliar emotional territory. "It means a lot to hear you acknowledge what happened." For the next hour, we talked more openly than we had in our entire lives. Madison described her therapeutic journey, the painful process of confronting her behavior patterns and their impact on others. I shared my own path toward healing, the support groups and therapy that had helped me establish healthier boundaries and expectations. "I used to think your independence was a rejection of our family," Madison confessed. "I interpreted your self-sufficiency as a statement that we weren't good enough, that you didn't need us. It never occurred to me that you were simply creating the healthy space you needed to thrive. And I never understood how my distance might have felt to you," I acknowledged. "While I was focusing on protecting myself, I didn't see how my withdrawal might have reinforced your fears about being abandoned or replaced. This mutual recognition of how our coping mechanisms had inadvertently reinforced unhealthy dynamics marked a breakthrough in our understanding. It didn't erase the past, but it offered a new lens through which to view our shared history. As our conversation drew to a natural close, Madison stood to leave, clearly respectful of not overstaying her welcome in this initial reconnection. "I have a long way to go," she said at the door. "With therapy, with rebuilding my life, with learning to base my self-worth on something other than external validation or comparison to others." "We all have our work to do," I replied, "but acknowledging it is a significant step." Madison hesitated, then asked, "Would it be okay if I called you sometimes? Just to talk? I understand if that's too much right now." I considered the request carefully, weighing my own boundaries against the tentative hope this conversation had inspired. "Let's start with email," I suggested. "Give us both time and space to process our communication." She nodded, accepting this limited opening with grace I wouldn't have expected from her before. "Thank you for seeing me today, for listening, for the kidney, of course, but even more for not giving up on the possibility that people can change." After she left, I sat quietly in my living room, the silver bracelet in my palm, reflecting on the unexpected encounter. Madison's visit represented not an ending, but a beginning, the first tentative step toward a relationship based on honesty rather than competition, on mutual respect rather than manipulation. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from my father. Unlike the stilted birthday cards of years past, this was several pages of handwritten reflection, his usually impeccable penmanship occasionally marred by what appeared to be emotional moments during the writing. "I have failed you as a father," he wrote without preamble. "Not occasionally or accidentally, but consistently and fundamentally. In trying to protect Madison from her own insecurities, I became complicit in her mistreatment of you. In attempting to maintain family peace at any cost, I sacrificed truth and fairness. These are not small oversights, but profound moral failures for which I am deeply sorry." He went on to detail his own therapeutic journey, how at 69 he was finally confronting patterns established in his own childhood as the son of an alcoholic father and enabling mother. "I'm learning that family systems perpetuate themselves unless someone actively breaks the cycle," he wrote, unknowingly echoing words I often used in my support group. "I always prided myself on not being like my father, on never raising a hand in anger, never disappearing on drinking binges. But I now see that emotional absence can be as damaging as physical absence, that failure to protect one child from another's hostility is its own form of neglect." Unlike Madison, my father did explicitly ask for forgiveness, but with the important caveat that he expected nothing and would respect whatever boundaries I needed to maintain. "I hope to earn back your trust gradually, through consistent action rather than promises," he concluded. "But I will understand if that's not possible or not what you want." My acknowledgement of my failures comes with no strings attached. I kept the letter, reading it several times in the following weeks, noting how my emotional response evolved from skepticism to cautious optimism to genuine appreciation for his willingness to take responsibility without qualification. I responded with equal honesty, acknowledging his effort while expressing the need for continued careful rebuilding rather than immediate resumption of close contact. My mother's journey proved more complicated. While she participated in therapy alongside my father, her deeply ingrained social conditioning made authentic self-reflection more challenging. Her communications remained tinged with performative elements, references to what other people would think about our family situation, concerns about appearances rather than emotional realities. But even within these limitations, I noticed small shifts toward greater authenticity and less image management. "Your mother is trying," my father noted during one of our now regular phone calls. "She doesn't have the language for this work yet, but she's showing up for the sessions, asking questions, gradually allowing herself to consider perspectives that contradict her lifelong assumptions." I appreciated his gentle defense of her efforts, without excusing the impact of her behavior. This balanced perspective represented significant growth in his own understanding of healthy family dynamics. As the second anniversary of the transplant approached, I received an invitation to speak at a national organ donation awareness conference. The opportunity to share my experience with medical professionals and potential donors represented a meaningful way to transform my personal journey into broader advocacy. In preparing my presentation, I found myself reflecting on the complex intersection of medical and emotional realities that organ donation entails. My kidney now functioned in Madison's body, filtering toxins and sustaining her life regardless of our relationship status. This biological reality existed independently of our emotional connection or disconnection, a profound illustration of how giving can occur without the expectation of reciprocity or recognition. The true gift wasn't just the kidney, I noted in my draft speech. It was the catalyst it provided for truth, for confronting family dynamics that had remained unacknowledged for decades. The medical procedure forced a level of honesty that might never have emerged otherwise. This realization that the transplant had ultimately saved two lives, Madison's and my own, though in very different ways, felt like the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. My kidney would continue functioning in Madison's body, whether we fully reconciled or not. My healing would continue regardless of whether my family fully acknowledged past dynamics or not. These parallel processes could inform each other, but remained fundamentally independent. On the evening before the conference, I hosted a small dinner party at my condo, a gathering of the chosen family that had supported me throughout my recovery and healing journey. Rachel and Jordan were there, along with 3 members of my support group who had become close friends, and even Ryan, who happened to be in Chicago for business. As we sat around my dining table, sharing food and conversation, I was struck by the authenticity of the relationships built on mutual respect and genuine care rather than obligation or shared DNA. These people had seen me at my most vulnerable and had offered support without expectation of return. They had honored my boundaries while encouraging my growth, celebrated my successes without competition, and held space for my struggles without judgment. Looking around the table, I noticed the empty chair I'd intentionally left at the far end, not out of expectation that Madison or my parents would suddenly appear, but as a symbolic acknowledgement that my heart remained open to healthy reconnection should it become possible. The empty chair represented not absence but possibility, the space I had created for new relationships with my family of origin, should they continue their own healing journeys. Not the resumption of old patterns or the fulfillment of unrealistic expectations, but the potential for something new, something healthier, something based on who we were becoming rather than who we had been. In that moment, surrounded by genuine connection while acknowledging the possibility of reconciliation without demanding or expecting it, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for most of my life. The journey hadn't been what I would have chosen, marked by pain, betrayal, and difficult truths, but it had led me to a place of authentic self-worth that external validation could neither create nor destroy. My sister had 250 people at her wedding reception, but not one seat for me. After her honeymoon, life took an unexpected turn that forced all of us to confront painful truths. The journey since has taught me that family is sometimes those who share your blood, sometimes those who share your heart, and sometimes those who share both. But perhaps most importantly, I've learned that giving my kidney saved 2 lives. Madison's through the physical organ, and mine through the freedom I found when I finally released the need for family approval and embraced my own inherent worth. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you experienced similar family dynamics? What boundaries have you set to protect your own well-being? Like this video if any part of my journey resonated with you, subscribe for more stories of healing and transformation, and share with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by family recognition. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the most important relationship to heal is the one with yourself.